Tim, cut that out.
Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the No Name Music Cast. My name's Tim, and this is
Joy.
And here at the top of the show, I think Joy has some music news for you.
I'm wondering if Tim may have the same music news. We'll find out in a minute. So this one is actually about Sir Paul McCartney. He has announced that he is releasing a new podcast called McCartney, A Life in Lyrics. Have you heard of this, Tim?
No, I haven't. I was listening to something this week about the new Beatles song, which is very interesting, but not about the podcast.
So this is a direct quote from him. He says, it's going to be like going back to an old snapshot album, looking back on work I haven't thought much about for quite a few years. Basically, it's going to be like stories behind their best-selling songs. Each episode will see a single he worked on at some point in time, either with the Beagles. Yes, he worked for the Beagles, everybody. The Beatles, or with Wings, as well as his solo career. So there'll be different episodes. So far, the first season includes the history of Eleanor Rigby, Let It Be, and Live and Let Die are the ones they've released as titles so far. Interesting.
Now, is this a premium podcast, or is this one that's available on all your various services?
From what I'm seeing, I think it is going to exclusively be on iHeartRadio.
Well, that will limit its reach, I'm sure.
I lied. iHeartRadio, and it does say it will come on Apple and Spotify, but they don't know about anything else yet. But iHeartRadio is the one that you keep seeing like their picture and all the things talking about it. So I think it's like their podcast.
Interesting. Well, I will definitely have to check that out. I, as I said before, I've been transferring all my podcasts and listening history, manually no less, over to Spotify. So maybe next time I'm doing a little bit of podcast maintenance, I'll see if I can find the McCartney pod.
Well, I am definitely going to start. I haven't seen an official date. Okay. Release is, I lied, September 20th. So mark that down. September 20th is the release. And I want to listen to it. And I want to kind of give some little updates on the podcast of what I think of it.
There you go. It'll make a change for me listening to NPR and also 80s Wrestling, the podcast.
Of course, that's what you're listening to. I mean, to be fair, all I listen to is there's two different true crime podcasts that I listen to. My favorite being True Crime Obsessed. That's where I got Give It a Goog from. It's not an original. That's what they say on there.
Well, I mean, you owned it now. It's become part of No Name Music Cast folklore.
I listened to that podcast so much, Tim, that it got imprinted in my brain. It came out without even thinking about it. There you go.
Well, excellent stuff. Well, let me just follow up with a Paul McCartney Beatles story. This isn't part of my music news section, but it made me think of it when you're talking of Paul McCartney. So I listened to Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller fame. He has a podcast called Penn Sunday School, and he was over in London recently. They did some Penn and Teller gigs there, and then he went to Spain to do a series of magic shows with a guy called Hondro, and it was called Penn and Hondro. Now, Penn has learned how to speak Spanish over the last 3 or 4 years, so he did an entire magic show in Spanish.
That's really fun because, like, as someone who's kind of trained in foreign language and is super interested in that, the words you're using at a magic show aren't like everyday words you're going to use. So he probably had to put some work into learning that.
Yeah, and it's an audience participation show. So people come up on stage and he interacts with them. So he has to have a certain level of his knowledge of Spanish. So he said that he did more prep for that than anything he'd ever done with Penn and Teller.
That makes sense. It's a lot of work.
Exactly. But anyhow, the reason I bring this up is he is friends with Giles Martin, obviously, because Penn Jillette is friends with everyone. He's friends from everyone from Kerry King from Slayer, Debbie Gibson, and all those talking heads from Fox News. And he's equally friends with all of them. And I don't know how that works, but it does.
Okay, then.
Yeah. But he's friends with George Martin's son, Giles Martin. And he got a tour of Abbey Road. By Giles Martin. And while he was there, he got to hear the new Beatles track, the one that we spoke of an episode or two ago. And he gave some details about this Beatles track. So it started off life as a demo that John Lennon had. And it was John Lennon singing, playing piano. But the problem was that the television was on in the background and the television was very loud. Now, back in the 90s, when the anthology came out, the technology didn't exist to cleanly remove the TV. And apparently Paul McCartney liked the track, and he got George Harrison to play some guitar on this particular track. But he just couldn't get the TV out, and it just sounds bad because there's this TV babbling over in the background. So he asked every producer, every engineer, every computer expert back in the 90s whether it could be done. They attempted it, and it just wasn't clean enough. It just didn't sound good. So, of course, roll forward to 2023, and computers can do that now. So very easy. Let's strip the TV out. Let's isolate John's vocal. Let's isolate the piano. You can do that. It's all done. So they pulled all the component parts apart. I said George Harrison had already played some guitar in it, so that piece is done. Paul McCartney sang on it because he wanted to sing with John one more time. However, he's 80-year-old Paul McCartney, and as part of the last episode, we're celebrating Paul for reaching that milestone and still out there getting it done. However, he wanted it to sound like the Beatles, and 80-year-old Paul McCartney doesn't sound like him singing in the Beatles anymore. So using the same technology, they de-aged his voice.
That's cool.
So he sang, and then they made it sound like he did when he was 20 years old.
That would be so weird to hear back as a person. Do you know what I mean? To hear yourself singing what you just sang, but it was you 20 years ago.
Yeah. So they did that. So they got the track down probably to a click, and then Giles Martin approaches Ringo and says, "Ringo, this is the final Beatles track. Will you play drums on it?" And he's like, "No, I don't want to do it." And Giles gave it a few days, and then he called him back and he said, "Ringo, you are the drummer in the Beatles. This is the last time you will ever get a chance to be the drummer in the Beatles." And he went, "All right, then." So he knocked out some drums at home and got the files emailed over, and then the track is complete. So yeah, I think it's coming out September or something like that. September, November, that kind of time. September, October, November, towards the end of the year. And yeah, this will be the last ever Beatles track.
Well, it'll be interesting because the podcast comes out September 20th. So maybe it's kind of like a all together at the same time type thing.
Maybe that's the thing. Maybe it's all that's where it's coming from. Maybe that's the thing that's going to launch it. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm not sure either, but that would be cool.
But it's very interesting. It's cool that Penn got to hear the track before anybody else did.
And apparently he's best friends with everyone. That's what I got from this story.
Oh, it's ridiculous. He tells stories about people who turn up backstage at the Penn and Teller show in Vegas. And like I said, it's every spectrum of entertainment and everything. And like
ideology, politics, whatever.
Yeah, and he has friends that are like sports stars, but he's like me. He doesn't really like sport, but he just knows them on a personal level. Like this will be baseball, football, superstar so-and-so, and he has no knowledge of what they do, apart from he's that dude who he's friends with and they have lunch with once in a while.
I mean, it is what it is. Sometimes people are just very friendly, Tim. All right. So I think you had some other news, some actual news for us.
Yeah. So I've got two things here. I've got a piece of music news and I've got a piece of personal news. So the first piece of music news, are you familiar with the band Dogstar?
No. What is it? I need more details to define that, but based on what you just said, no.
Okay. So the band Dogstar is a 90s alt rock band. Okay. And they are famous because Keanu Reeves is the bass player.
Yeah, okay, I know who they are, yes. I know what that is in my brain. I can see it now, correct.
Well, Dogstar are back out on tour, and they have new music, the first new music in over 20 years.
See, Charlie is a huge fan, and so I'm not of the band of Keanu Reeves. And so I knew he was in a band and he played bass at some point in his life, but I'm going to be honest, I've never really listened to him. Tim, have you kind of went down the rabbit hole? Are they quite good, or what are we looking at?
Well, I remember it being out at the time, and I was sort of like, nah. But I mean, you listen to it back now to Dogstar, and it's very much of the era of 90s alt rock. It certainly didn't sound out of place for that sort of era. But of course, if they were just like a regular band that had those songs, they might make a blip on the radar, or they may not. I don't know. But of course, Keanu Reeves is the bass player. So people are going to go and see Dogstar because he's the bass player.
It's kind of like Johnny Depp with his kind of like that band he did at his, like, he owned that club so he could play in that band. You know what I mean? Like Johnny Depp. Like, I feel like more people know bands that he's been in just because he was in the band.
Yeah, because he was touring with Jeff Beck on Jeff Beck's final tour. And he also plays in a band called the Hollywood Vampires, which is like a supergroup, which has Alice Cooper in it.
I just kept thinking he's in that Vampires one. But yeah, I feel like more people just go for the kind of spectacle that is Johnny Depp than the actual band.
Absolutely. But anyhow, with Dogstar, they have a new album out in October. I'm sure everybody is very excited, and they're going to be back out on tour. So Keanu's going to be back out getting it done. But was he Bill or Ted? I can't remember.
Bill, right?
Probably. Anyway.
I like how I asked that, like, Tim didn't just say, I don't remember. Like, somehow he's going to magically remember when I yell it at him.
Whichever one he was, Bill or Ted, he's back out there on tour with Dogstar. Go and catch them. They'll be playing everywhere apart from anywhere near here, no doubt.
I keep visualizing, and I think it's Bill. Somebody screwed at me. I'm completely wrong. It's backwards. Charlie would be so mad and disappointed in me for not knowing that.
Yeah, Bill and or Ted, but there we go.
Anyway.
Anyhow, I have one piece of personal music news. So as I revealed an episode or two ago, I was gifted 2 huge folders of CDs from the early 2000s, I suppose. I think they're like maybe late 90s, some of it, but mostly early 2000s. And I've been working through these CDs, and most of it is sort of like alt metal, Korn, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've been going through it. However, I've got to my first CD that I'm incredibly excited about, and I haven't listened to it yet, but I have seen what's on it. So this CD was just called Music. That's all it said, Music. And then it had
narrow it down.
Yeah, and then it had the date of October the 4th, which is my birthday, but 2004. So somebody on my birthday in 2004 decided that they were going to burn this CD. And it's not an audio CD, it's an MP3 CD. So predominantly for playing in your computer, but like my CD player downstairs will play an MP3 CD. And if you have a CD player in your car, it would likely play it too. So it's burned as data rather than audio. So it has a bunch of folders on it. And I just wanted you to see this slice into this person's life back in 2004 and what's on it. Okay. So you have three doors down on there. You have the Bare Naked Ladies, which are actually a fantastic Canadian band. You have the greatest hits of Duran Duran.
Of course you do.
Yeah. You have the Foo Fighters.
Yep.
You have Moby.
It all makes sense.
And actually, I really like Moby. I sometimes like that sort of electronica music. You have The Offspring.
Offspring's my favorite.
Yeah. Then you have an act called Punk Static Paranoia.
Not familiar with it, but I guess.
Yep. And then there's the next folder is Robert Shaw and the Atlantic Symphony Orchestra and Chorus.
Isn't that always the way when you were like burn an album? Like you'll be on like a roll and there'll just be something completely random. And you're like, how did that get there?
Yeah. And then the next one you have is Soulfly. Then They Might Be Giants. Again, another sort of slice of late 90s, early 2000 life. And then we close out this MP3 with not just a single, an entire album from Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Did I burn this album on October 4th, 2004? Because it sounds like what I would have done.
Well, maybe when I'm finished with it, I'll give it to you because maybe it'd be a complete flashback. Maybe so whoever burnt it back then was channeling you.
Yes. Earlier, I was outside. So this isn't like an indicator of my childhood growing up and my age. Somebody outside said, where? They yelled it at a person across the road. There was like a tow truck out here in front of a house and they were yelling back and forth. And somebody yelled, where? And all I could think of is, where did you come from? Where did you go? And I had that in my head for like 2 hours afterwards. Cotton Eye Joe, for those who didn't get the reference. I think Tim got it.
Yeah. Cotton Eye Joe is on my disco rotation because sometimes, depending on where we play, I quote unquote DJ the breaks with the band. So we've played some parties and moose lodges and stuff that want that, and you can tell that they want it. And you play all your Cupid shuffles and your all that kind of stuff. But sometimes I'll throw Cotton Eye Joe in. I tell you, people lose it when you put that on.
Well, it's the part where the girl starts singing the back, her voice specifically, that always sticks out to me.
Yeah, he goes,
I was humming it. I was like, and Charlie looked at me and went, are you singing Cotton Eye Joe? And I was like, yes. And I find it random because they weren't even American. That Rednecks band is from like Germany or something.
I think they're Swedish. I think
maybe. That makes sense, but they're definitely someone that I saw winning. Like, you know what I mean? What's the talent show every year?
The Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah, that's what I imagine when I imagine Eurovision for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, certainly back when I used to watch Eurovision, that is classic Eurovision fodder. What's happened in the post-Terry Wogan reality, I have no idea.
Well, I mean, maybe one day we'll go down that rabbit hole, but I've never watched Eurovision. I can say that. I watched a movie that was with Will Ferrell called Eurovision that was making fun of Eurovision. If that counts, but...
Well, it's an interesting thing, the Eurovision Song Contest, because it's whatever the culture of each country, they put their best people out there. And within that country, I'm sure that to some degree it's normal-ish. But of course, especially back then in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, you wasn't exposed to so much culture from around the world. So you'd see people with like quirky, pointy hats going blah, 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 or whatever. And then it was just really alien to you to see that.
It really was. And I think that's what caught on. And that's what made it so interesting from an American looking in. Like, it was like, these bands, like we're joking about, like the redneck, the band kind of fonter, because it's just over the top. That's all it looks like to you, even if it's not. And you know what I mean? Because you're just not familiar.
Exactly.
Anyway.
But there we are. Okay, so that was music news. Did you have any other updates for us, Joy?
If you know anyone in the HR world in the U.S. specifically, this is for our U.S. HR friends who do the same job I do every day. Say, just keep them in your thoughts. Be nice to them. The American government has decided to change some rules around like I-9 verification because COVID apparently no longer exists, and things we used to be able to do remotely we can't anymore. So we're having to go back all the way and fix employment records back to 2020. So just be nice to us.
Yeah, if you're in the United States and you're onboarding with a job or liaising with somebody through an interview or you're providing documentation, be nice and be patient. So this week, it's Joy's topic. I never know what the topic is, as you know. And so, Joy, it's over to you.
So this is going to be one of those kind of random, maybe about music, maybe not about music. It's up for debate. But if you love those topics, I know one Phil Reese says he loves when me and Tim get to go off on a lot more tangents, then you're going to love this episode because this is the music urban legends episode. So we're going to discuss urban legends around musicians. We've done episodes like this a little bit before. I've done ones about like, crazy stories, things they did at concerts. This is specifically things like when me and Tim talk about Paul McCartney already being dead.
Okay.
So there you go. All right. So this one, I have to say, was what I wanted to start with. And when I read it, I just had to chuckle. Let me bring it up. So hold on, everybody. There's a whole list here. I'm finding the one specifically I wanted to start with. But so apparently there is Paul McCartney was killed in a car crash, which me and Tim have talked about 1,000 times, so we're not going to get back into that. If you don't know, Paul McCartney's been body swapped with his brother, right? Is that?
I think it was his brother.
All right. So did you know that there is an actual urban legend specifically around Led Zeppelin? And I just have to laugh because it's so stupid. But there's a whole like boards, Reddit threads, everything. Supposedly Led Zeppelin sold their soul to the devil, and they account for this.
Yes, I think I've heard that before. I mean, they were mostly playing at the beginning African-American blues music, and they were playing music by Robert Johnson. Now, Robert Johnson was supposedly the first person who sold his soul to the devil at the Crossroads. In exchange for having his extreme talent on the guitar and his songs and performance and all that kind of stuff. So because, especially at the very beginning of their career, they were channeling that energy and they were channeling that music. It doesn't surprise me that they would be sort of put under the same umbrella as Robert Johnson and his contemporaries.
Well, the story is even more detailed than that. So apparently they had a big love of blues, the band did, and Jimmy Page professed he was really interested in a British occultist. This guy's name is Aleister Crowley. Don't know who he is, but apparently he was a British occultist. And they even brought Crowley to their house in 1970, which made the rumors stir a little bit more. So basically, it surfaced that they did something with him that night, and they sold their souls to the devil to get their talents. And this was pre-Stairway to Heaven. It was Stairway to Heaven come out. Everybody kind of claimed him talking about this level of talent they had. Mm-hmm. That's where they said it came from this occultist. His name is Leister Crowley. Never heard of him.
And you know the other interesting thing about Aleister Crowley? That is who the Ozzy Osbourne song Mr. Crowley is about. Oh,
okay. That's very interesting. Did you know of this person, Tim, at all?
No, I just Googled it while you was typing.
That's funny. So anyway, they made a deal with the devil, and that is how they got their talent. So Tim was onto something, but it's specifically around apparently Mr. Crowley.
Interesting.
Right. Very, very interesting. This, though, is actually I felt bad for this one because it sounds really bad. So what really happened between Alice Cooper and the chicken? Are you familiar with this story, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, this is very early on in the career of Alice Cooper. I think this is when the band was called Alice Cooper, and Alice Cooper was just Vincent Furnier. But certainly they were pioneers of shock rock, 100%. And now if you see Alice, he cuts his head off in a guillotine, and he does it every night, and it's fake blood and stuff. But back then they were biting their heads off chickens and things like that.
So here's how that got started and how it's kind of true that he was biting the head off a chicken, but he wasn't. Anyway, so basically, Tim is correct. It would have been when they were the band Alice Cooper, because it's 1969. It was a show in Toronto called Rock and Roll Revival. A live chicken somehow ended up on stage. Thinking it could fly, the singer threw it towards the crowd. So Alice Cooper thought the chicken could fly. So he said that's what he claims. He said he thought if he threw it, it would fly, which obviously chickens are flightless birds, but he didn't know that. So at which point it was ripped to pieces by his fans. However, it quickly circulated that he bit the head off the bird and drank its blood. Even Frank Zappa called him and asked if it was true, but Alice Cooper said it was not. And now he does the kind of fake show to play on that Tim was talking about.
I know, but the thing is here, if someone threw a chicken, would you rip it to pieces? That's terrible.
That's what I thought. Like, what? Why in the audience was the reaction to rip the chicken to pieces?
I mean, if the chicken is attacking you, I could maybe see that you want to be sort of defensive in your actions, but just to this rip it apart for the sake of ripping it apart, that seems terribly barbaric.
Yeah, it leaves the question, and imagine if that happened nowadays. PETA would throw a fit.
Yeah, and also the question, what was a chicken doing at an Alice Cooper concert? Now, as we all know, I played a gig recently and there was a snake on stage. Now, where the venue was is a reasonably rural area. It's unusual to have a snake indoors, but it's not outside the realms of possibility. But in a Normo Dome arena or whatever it is, how did that chicken get in there?
Well, and it's in Toronto, Canada. I don't know. I guess chickens are everywhere, but Canada doesn't seem to be very heavy on the chicken.
No, I've been to Toronto. Toronto is a big, huge international city that's very built up. It's not rural by any stretch of the imagination.
People out there are going, you don't know anything about Toronto. I'll have you know I saw 3 chickens today.
I mean, I went to Toronto. I went up the CN Tower. I walked down a number of streets in the downtown area. I went to the Eaton Centre. I've bought several pairs of Vans shoes in the Eaton Centre in Toronto. I ate a delicious vegan meal at a restaurant there, and lots of other stuff that you do when you're in a big touristy city type place. But I did not see any poultry running around.
I've only been to Quebec. I've never been to Toronto, but I can't say I didn't see any poultry when I was in Quebec. Of course, it was like freezing winter carnival time. So, like, if there were a chicken, I don't think they would have wanted to be out. They would have been trying to go somewhere where it was warm.
Yeah, if there wasn't any chickens running about, they would be suitably dressed because the Canadians are normally dressed well for that incredibly cold weather up there in the frozen north.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, moving along. This is not a chicken podcast or a chicken identification podcast. I told you this is going to be a weird one. I picked another one. This is a song me and Tim talked about quite a bit. Tim has played this song more than he'd like to admit, and my twin sister is named after this song. So this is the story behind Brandy, You're a Fine Girl. So for those who don't know by the Looking Glass, in the song, he's singing about, supposedly the theory was that it was inspired by Mary Ellis, a woman from New Brunswick, New Jersey, who died in 1828. As per local legend, Ellis fell in love with a sea captain who swore he'd marry her when he'd come back. But he never came back, which is, the story in the song, pretty much. Mm-hmm. The truth is, while the Looking Glass are from New Brunswick, the songwriter and guitarist Elliot claims to have written the song Brandy, partially about his high school girlfriend, whose name was actually Brandy.
Oh, goodness me.
I don't know why, but that made me laugh. And then it morphed into a song about a fictional barmaid, but not Marie Ellis. Now, I have never heard that story. I've seen it online, he said, denying any knowledge of the Ellis mythology. And if that story is true, it's just a remarkable coincidence.
Interesting. I had not heard of any of that information before.
I hadn't either. I just thought it was just a romantic song that happened to take place in the sea area. I would have never associated it with any specific person or story. I don't know. It's a pretty vague song.
Yeah, very, very, very vague. Which we know the best songs are open to interpretation.
Fair enough. All right. So the next one is a song that my husband loves a lot. This is Wind of Change by the Scorpions. Mm-hmm. So the theory is that the 1991 power ballad, which arrived shortly before the collapse of the Soviet Union, wasn't actually written by the West German rocker Scorpions, and it was secretly penned by the CIA to promote the Western agenda. Have you ever heard that?
No, I haven't. I thought it was a song written by the Scorpions who was cashing in on the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's what I thought.
I guess it happened shortly before. I guess it was written shortly before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the Scorpions frontman Klaus insists that he wrote the song, not the American government. It's a fascinating idea and it's an entertaining idea, but it's not true at all. In 2020, shortly after the debut of the Wind of Change podcast, apparently there's a Wind of Change podcast if anybody's interested in listening to that, where it explores the conspiracy in more depth.
I mean, does the American government have a team of songwriters ready to write these songs at any given moment? I mean, it's a catchy song. I mean, it's Scorpions. It's off their album Another World, that I really, really like. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense that the government would be writing these sort of propaganda songs.
Well, and then it makes you wonder who started this theory. Did one person hear it and then in their brain they had to convey this whole story and then tell one person and tell another person and tell another person until it became a theory? How did that start as a rumor?
I don't know. Though I would like to say one thing about Wind of Change. The album version, and I was wrong, it's from the album Crazy World, not Another World. The album version of that has a great guitar solo by Rudy Schenker. It's beautiful. He's playing his Flying V on the neck pickup. It sounds great. But the single version cuts almost all of that solo out and just goes straight to the end bit. And I would just like to lodge a complaint, 30 years after the fact, that the single version cut half the guitar solo out.
I mean, I will say in this house, we listened to the full version, and that's because Charlie is obsessed with that song. I remember when we first got married, he didn't have the level of music knowledge he has now. And he was trying to describe this song to me. And it was basically, well, there's this band and they're talking about a wind of change and they're really whiny. Wow. Thanks, Charlie. really, really narrowed that down for me. I really will get that from that statement. He does that all the time, Tim. I don't know if people do this to you in your life, but Charlie specifically will walk up to me one day. I kid you not. One day he walked up to me and asked me, "What's the song that there's dogs barking in the beginning?" He was talking about What I Got by Sublime. Remember the dogs barking in the beginning? Yeah. It took us 3 hours and a lot of back and forth. But he'll walk up to me and go, what's that, Joy? And I'm like, I don't know. It's nothing.
Well, I will say that the Google machine these days is very good for that. And I've before had songs that I was trying to work out who they were, what they were by. And then sometimes you can just put a fragment of the lyric in and it'll figure it out.
Oh, yeah. It's just funny because, like, he'll just, like, we'll be, like, in the middle of, like, driving down the, I'll be driving. Like, I physically am driving, and he'll look at me and go, what's that song? And I'm like, and then he does it again. Like, he doesn't change it, Tim, in any way. He just does the same sound again, like, in the 30 seconds from when I said, I don't know, I'm going to learn it. And I'm like, I still don't know what that is. And sometimes he gets songs, like in his mind, he gets songs mixed up. The other day there was a Aerosmith song on, and I can't remember what song it was, but it was on the radio. And me and my friend Molly were in the car with him, and he was driving, and we were going to a Roanoke thing, and he got it mixed up with this country song, and he kept like intertwining the lyrics and trying to ask us if he was right. We were like, no, we don't know what any of this is, but that's right. All right. That was a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, that's something that happens in my life. Charlie just assumes that he can hum anything at me and I'll pick up whatever song it is. Okay, so let's pick another. I'm enjoying these kind of like song theories, so we're going to stick on this for a little bit. So the song is You Dropped a Bomb on Me by the Gap Band, which I'm sure Tim has played many times doing his aka DJing, which is just pressing play button.
Yes, I have had that on break music many times. And then, in fact, in the last band that I was in, we actually used to play that song. And the bass player had some kind of fuzz synth type effect on his bass. And he used to go, bam, boom, 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 boom. We used to play it. It was actually a pretty good song to play.
I love that song. But what's funny is, and this is another thing where they're probably taking it too literal. So the theory is that the 1982 funk standard is actually about the Tulsa race massacre of 1921. We won't get into it, but you can Google that later. Basically, a lot of African-American people died. And Charlie Wilson was like, no, it's just about a woman who is a little older than a guy. So she turned him out. He didn't know how to cope and he was young. That's all the song's about. Yeah,
again, it's things are open to interpretation. For example, the Kim Cairns song "Betty Davis Eyes."
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a cover. It's not her song originally, though the cover is different from the way that she did it. But the lyrics are not hers. And whenever I hear that song, I have a very clear vision of what it's about. I think it's about a lady of the night. But Hannah disagrees. She doesn't think it's about a lady of the night. But whenever I hear it, that's what I come away with.
I'm playing it in my head. Hang on. Yeah, I could see how it could be that, but I also just thought it was her describing someone that's like a figure in their life, like not necessarily a woman of the night, but like somebody that's like a friend or something, describing how she's maniacal.
Yeah, and the other lines in it says she's pure as New York snow. Now, New York snow being cocaine.
Oh, yeah. She knows just what it takes to make... Okay, she's precocious.
She knows just what it takes. Yeah, she's precocious. She knows just what it takes to make a pro blush.
I mean, it does sound what Tim is saying. I hear it. Well, what does Hannah think it's about?
She thinks it's like the things what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it being either way. It could go either way. It's up for, but see, that's why those are important. It is up for interpretation. One, it creates an interest and you can relate it to yourself. So like when you write something and you leave it very vague like this, Tim, you can relate it to different things in your life. And that's why it speaks to people. That's why these songs that are so open are usually a little bit better than a very distinct song like Candle in the Wind. That's a bad example because that's like the best selling song of all time. But I was thinking Candle in the Wind, the one for Marilyn Monroe. Yeah. But I realized that's like, isn't that like the highest grossing song ever or something like that?
I don't think it is, but I mean, it's way
Or
up
the
there.
Diana version is.
Yeah, it's way up there.
Yeah, so that's not a good example, but that is a very specific song.
Yes.
All right, so the next rumor is about Charles Manson because, would it really be this episode if we didn't talk about him at least once, that he auditioned for the Monkees?
Yes, I think he was wrapped up in that monkey world because I'm sure when I went to the Alcatraz Crime Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, they had a guitar that belonged to Charles Manson. And there was he had something to do with the Beach Boys. Mm-hmm. And I think he either wrote or produced a song for the Beach Boys. But I seem to remember the little plaque on the wall mentioning something about other musical endeavors. And I don't know if it actually mentioned the Monkees, but that doesn't surprise me because they were talking about other musical things that he'd done.
Yes. So it's actually not true, but I'll tell you how the rumor came and Tim's on to something. So he was part of that. Remember that episode we did about that area outside of Los Angeles or San Francisco where all the musicians were? Mm-hmm. And we talked about the Beatles. Apparently he was part of that canon, Laurel Cannon. That's what it was, which is where the rock scene was that we've talked about. So basically the theory is that he auditioned for them, but Snoops did the research. Manson was incarcerated at McNeil Island when the show was cast in 1965 and wasn't released until 1967. So he was already in jail. So there was no way he could have. But apparently it was a big known thing that a lot of people thought that he auditioned for the Monkees.
Yeah, maybe he was involved in pre-production or something before the casting took place.
I mean, it's possible, but it's just kind of random to think, what if he had made it? What if Marilyn Manson was one of the Monkees?
Yeah, that
Manson, not Manson.
Yeah, anyway. that would be weird. We're actually currently watching the Monkees. We have been watching episodes of the Monkees for years, literally for years. We pick it up once in and now and again, and Hannah hates it. And I said, we have to get through it. And some of the episodes are all right, but some of them are just slapstick and terrible. They're
very farcy in a way, one person runs in one door and one person runs out the next door, and they're very the Three Stooges.
Yeah, I mean, as we know, the whole thing was based on the Beatles' Hard Day's Night. The US TV networks wanted something that was like Hard Day's Night but tuned for the US audience, and they came up with the Monkees. And as you know, you watch the Monkees, it's of no coincidence that they're using Vox Super Beatle amplifiers or Gretsch drums or Gretsch guitars, or Rickenbacker guitars. It's Beatles equipment. I wonder how they got that idea. And they're all wearing little outfits that are all exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious. But yeah, was the Three Stooges strictly an American thing, or was the Three Stooges a universal thing?
I think it's predominantly a US thing. I'm aware of the Three Stooges, mostly since I've lived here. They maybe showed that, but it wasn't something that was ingrained in UK culture. We had things like Some Mothers Do Have 'Em, which was sort of slapstick.
I was thinking Benny Hill or whatever that one.
Yeah, and we had Benny Hill as well. Yeah, I suppose Benny Hill would probably be a more direct comparison. But yeah, maybe it was something they showed on Channel 4 late at night, but it wasn't something that was ingrained in the culture.
Well, for those who aren't in America, when I say the Three Stooges, think Benny Hill, or. Yeah, that's the closest I got.
Same sort of thing.
Benny Hill was one of those ones that was universal, though. I definitely remember seeing that and see reference to it. And I think it became kind of a pop culture thing.
It did. And all of the Benny Hill episodes were filmed at Teddington Studios, Thames Television in Teddington Studios, which is about 3 or 4 miles down the road from where I used to live in Twickenham. So effectively, it was made on my doorstep.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that, but all right. Anyway, I didn't know Tim was partially half removed cousin of Benny Hill TV, whatever. I can't come up with anything good. Somehow Tim's connected to it because he lived there. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and some of the episodes were filmed at Thorpe Park, which is a theme park, which is near Chertsey, again, which is not too far from where I used to live.
Yeah, I knew that too. Okay, well, I got nothing to say with that. I'll take Tim's word for it. All right, so I didn't know this, but you know how there's always that running joke about this is Spinal Tap, the fictional way drummers keep dying in bizarre ways, that whole thing. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole thing about the Grateful Dead's keyboardists. Did you know about this? That their keyboardists keep dying?
No.
I didn't either. So in succession, Rob Pigpen McCurth, Keith Godcho, I don't know that I said that right, and Brett Midland all died either during their tenure with tenure with their tenure with the dead or within a year of leaving. Vince Wilnick, who replaced Marilyn in 1990 and stayed until Jerry Garcia's death in 1996, died in 2006 at the age of 55. So they went through 4 keyboardists, and 3 of them all died while within a year of working for the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want that keyboard gig.
Were they using the same keyboard? Maybe they should have bought a new one.
Yeah, maybe it's some ancient Hammond organ with bad earthing. I don't know.
It was actually an organ they took from a church.
It could be like an old pipe organ or something like that.
But what's weird to me is like that seems like something I would know. I've never heard that before.
No, I mean, of course, if you're familiar with the film This Is Spinal Tap, that is one of the tropes that goes through that film, is that they keep having all these drummers die, and one dies in a bizarre gardening accident, another one dies choking on vomit, but it was someone else's vomit, and then at the very end of the film, the drummer explodes when they're on tour in Japan, and then it's a different guy is in the band, and it's a running gag through the film This Is Spinal Tap. And in fact, maybe we should do a This Is Spinal Tap episode. Is that something that you're familiar with, that film?
Yeah, it is. I've watched it a few times.
Yeah, I mean, everything in that film is true. Everything to some degree has happened to me on some level. And it doesn't matter that it's, from the 80s and it's 40 years old at this point. You can watch that as a band who's never played a note, and you can see that and you can identify things that's going on. So even if you're planning to be a band and you haven't even played your first practice yet, watch Spinal Tap and it's like, yeah, I can identify with that and that and that and that.
I can think of my high school, the 2 high school bands I was in, and even there I can identify. I remember there's like one scene where they're practicing, and I just have a very distinct memory in my life that it lines up so perfectly with. So Tim's right. And it's just hilarious if you've never seen it.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about This Is Spinal Tap is there was no script. What they did is that they came up with scenarios, and it's like, okay, Nigel, you're in this room here, and then you've got an amp that goes up to 11. I want you to talk about why it goes up to 11 and go. And then they built the film in the edit, basically. All of the cast were very talented, and they were all improv comedians, so they could do that stuff off the top of their head. And then the film was built in the edit. I've seen a longer edit of it where it's like 4 hours long, and it is not funny at all. And it's not, it really doesn't even hold your attention. But of course, the edit that you see of the film is perfect because they've cherry picked all the best things. And a talented editor has made those little scenes into the cut that you see in it.
Huh. That's very interesting. I never known that. But when I think about it now, it does feel like a lot of witty banter. So it makes sense.
Absolutely. But I mean, I reference Spinal Tap, I don't want to say every day, but certainly every week. Somehow I seem to have a Spinal Tap reference.
There's Tim's suggestion. If you've never watched Spinal Tap, go watch it.
Yeah,
all right.
Highly recommended.
So with that being said, I'm going to go back to these little theories around songs because I find them quite fun. And this one is around the song Hotel California, which I want you to know, Tim, they wrote the Eagles in my research.
Well, I'm sure that Don Henley's police will be serving some kind of subpoena.
Mental floss.
Yeah, they'll be serving a subpoena on mental floss sooner or later.
I just laugh. I still think about that kid last week where I was like talking about Eagles and he thought I was talking about the football team. And I was like, I'm not the one. Not me. Sorry, you're going to have to ask somebody else. All right. So the theory is, while in the lyrics it says hell and the beast, the 1976 smash celebrates the Church of Satan. So, of course, Hotel California is about the Church of Satan, the founder of which, Anthony LaVey, appears in the photo found on the inner cover of the Hotel California album, which I'm curious, Tim, do you have the Hotel California album?
I do. I have a vinyl copy of that, and it was gifted to me by Hog of No Name Music House guest fame. He used to have a reasonably extensive vinyl collection, and he trimmed it down, and he very kindly sent me a dozen or more of his prized albums one Christmas. So, yes, the copy I have of that, I do have it, and it came from him.
Well, the next time you do it, open it up, look in the inner cover. There is apparently a picture which has the founder of the Church of Satan up on a balcony.
Hmm.
All right. According to the Myth Debunking website, Snoops, because, everybody loves Snoops, that's not him in the photo, but rather a woman hired for the photo shoot. As for the famously abstract lyrics, Don Henley had to say this: "It's really about the excess of American culture, certain girls we knew, but it was also about the uneasy balance between art and commerce."
Yeah, again, I suppose you can interpret it any way you like. I think these days he would just tell you it's about commerce and the fact that he's forcing people to pay for goods and services branded as eagles.
So here's my thing, though. That would be the vaguest and weirdest description. Just listen to this on its face, for face value, Tim. It really is about the excess of American culture, whatever the heck that means, and certain girls we knew. But it was also about the uneasy balance between art and commerce. That literally says everything and nothing in one statement. Nothing of that makes any sense whatsoever.
Well, as a songwriter, he's keeping it vague so you can interpret it any way that you wish, I suppose.
I guess. But that's if that's not the songwriting version of a politician speaking, I don't know what is.
Well, as we know, Don Henley gives out politician vibes. He really does.
He does. But the excess of American culture. Anyway, I'm sorry. The more I read that statement, the worse it gets, because it's saying everything and nothing all at once.
But at least now he has 60 people to enforce his ideals. When back then he was just had vague press releases.
That is true. So the next song we're going to talk about is the song Salisbury Hill by Peter Gabriel. Are you familiar with this song, Tim?
I am indeed. I know that song very well.
So the theory is the eagle that swoops down to offer words of comfort to Peter Gabriel in the opening verse of the debut single symbolizes Bruce Springsteen, who had a massive impression on Gabriel when he first started playing in London in 1975. Springsteen's performance also inspired Gabriel to quit Genesis and go solo.
Maybe. I'm assuming that Bruce Springsteen was touring the UK around that time. It's not outside the realms of possibility that he would see Bruce Springsteen and be very influenced by him. I don't know. That could be true.
Well, it's not. His exact words were, "The interpretation is hogswash." Oh. Though he did catch Springsteen's London debut, because when I left Genesis, I wanted to be out of the music business. I felt like I was just in the machinery. We knew what we were going to do. We're going to be doing it 18 months or 2 years ahead, and I just didn't enjoy that. He wanted a life that was more, I don't know what's happening in 18 months, freedom, basically. But I just thought it was funny that you said all that, and then I'm like, well, he actually just said, no, that's hogwash.
It's hogwash.
It's a very British thing to say.
Yeah, the other British thing that people say is balderdash.
Yeah, that's a very British thing to say.
Yeah, maybe I'm going to start using hogwash and balderdash more. I don't know, as dismissive things.
Well, and Tim's been told that Tim has a very posh accent, according to a lot of people. I don't think your accent's that strong comparatively to some of the people who live in England that I talk to that Tim's also friends with. But for our area, obviously Tim stands out, and he's admitted to me that he thinks he's lost some of his accent.
I think it's slipped around the edges just a little bit.
I love that you said that with the most strong British accent right at the end. Now, the other thing is, and I laugh about this, but Tim kept a Excel spreadsheet of how many times people thought he was Australian for a while, or maybe New Zealandish. I don't know what they're called. New Zealand.
It was a spreadsheet I kept for an entire year, where people would ask me where I'm from. Do I go back home often? Was I Australian? Is my wife from here? And I kept it for a whole year. And it must be said this year, probably this year and last year, no one's asking me that anymore. Or if they are, don't pay any attention to it. But it was an interesting, I don't know if I can pull it up to hand. I may have it.
Live on air, everybody. He's looking it up.
Let me have a look at my documents. Where are we? It was called the Accent Tracker. No, that pulled up the Knight Rider Legacy ebook. That's something completely separate. I wonder what became of the Accent Tracker. Let's have a look at that accent.
That's funny.
I think it may have gone. It was in Google Drive. I don't know what happened to it.
Was it when your email went?
Maybe.
Could it have been under the old email
maybe,
somehow?
When I changed the email address, maybe it was in my previous Accent Tracker. Hmm? I think, Joy, we may be in business. Let's have a look live on air. Let's open up this Excel spreadsheet. No, it's this is here it is. Though it's somehow the formatting's got messed up. But anyhow, I've got these are the categories at least. Where people would say to me, I love your accent. People would say to me, I love the way you talk. Where someone would say, where are you from? Do you go back often? Do you like it here? Is your wife from here? Or whether I was misidentified as an Australian.
So I will say, what I was going to say, though, is I kind of get the Australian one. From an American's perspective, sometimes British and Australian accents can be very close. Now, I know you guys have different vernacular that you use, right? Of course. Mm-hmm. But generally, the sound is actually very similar when I hear it from an outside perspective. Now, don't come for me, Australians, and don't come for me, people from English. But that's just, I mean, truthfully, I understand why people could think someone with a British accent sounds Australian.
Yeah, I think if you're not exposed to people speaking like that all the time, I could see how you could misidentify. Certainly living in London, where you get a lot of people from all over the world, and you get to hear South Africans, you get to hear Australians, you get to hear New Zealanders, you get to hear lots of other folks from around the world. You can hear the differences very easily because they're all there in front of you to be heard. But like if you're in Southwest Virginia, middle of Nowheresville, and then some dude rolls up into the Shell gas station, and they're like, oh, where's this guy from? Australia?
I mean, I kind of get it. Well, and I think that vowel sound, and it depends on, just like in America, there's very different British accents. Like some people are very posh, some people are very Cockney, and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been described as someone who would appear on a language learning tape.
Yeah, you do give a very, which is why you work for at our work. Well, me and Tim, my old work, Tim's current work, where he does the phone system. Very you could be saying the GPS to people or something. Yeah,
as I've said before, I record all the auto attends. So I'll say things like, welcome to the Human Resources Department. For I-9 verification, press 1. And that's me. I do that.
Stupid I-9s. Let's not talk about those, Tim. I have a very big hatred for them at the moment. All right. So this one has a funny name, and that's why I want to talk about this one. This is called Taking Care of Pizza. So the song Taking Care of Business. That's what this is about. So basically, what this is, they say Randy Bachman is actually responsible for spreading it as a truth. This did not happen, but this is the story. When recording their hit, Taking Care of Business, Butchman Turner Overdrive apparently invited a pizza delivery guy to play the piano in the studio. So supposedly the person you hear playing on the track is a pizza delivery guy. Per Bachman's story, a guy sent to deliver pizzas to the Steve Miller Band, who was actually recording next door, stopped into his room by mistake. He suggests their song could use a piano. The pizza guy suggests that, and they take him up on it, and the rest is history. Bachman's brother, Robbie, however, said that is a big exaggeration on Randy's part. And what really happened is a session musician recording next door was asked to play the part on the piano. And in a hurry, he wrote the chord progression down on a pizza box.
Okay, well, that's a shame. I mean, I think the story is better if it was the pizza delivery man playing the piano part. It's certainly not unheard of. Back then, when almost everybody recorded in a recording studio, nobody was recording their stuff at home, so it'd be very common. You've got Bachman Turner Overdrive in one room. You've got, I don't know, David Bowie in another room, and then next door to that you've got Toto. I mean, it's that's what would happen. You'd have these huge commercial studios where everyone's recording together. So, and of course, they're in the break room, they're giving the coffee machine, and you're going to bump into somebody and you say, "Oh, you're here. You can just throw a bit of piano on this track for us. I think we're missing something."
Well, apparently this is such a inner debate between the brothers on who, what, where, when, how, that there was a radio station who brought them in and had them discuss it. And from what I understand, so it's a Seattle radio station, KZOK, whatever. One of those, letters, actually had the members of the band in the studio to sort out the truth. In fact, as well as a telephone interview with the pianist himself, Norman Durkee, a professional who credits include playing with Bette Midler and Barry Manilow. His best quote, "They don't get high, they just eat a lot of pizza." So not actually a pizza guy. One more thing, though. To working overtime stats. So basically, he said that he was talking about Bette Midler, Barry Manilow. They don't get high. They just eat a lot of pizza. I don't know why that's what they quoted him as. That's all it says, Tim, with no context. So that's the guy who played the piano. I don't know. That makes me laugh, though. Because, what was he? Okay. Anyway, guys, maybe he was talking about the Steve Miller Band because they were the ones ordering pizza. I'm not sure.
I mean, it could be the case. I mean, people who are not trained musicians, sort of playing on big commercial tracks, is not unprecedented. Are you familiar with the David Bowie song "Absolute Beginners"?
Yes.
So it has a female vocal on there who duets with David Bowie. And he had a very particular vision of how he wanted it to sound. He wanted something that he described to the producer as a street girl. And by that, it was just like somebody you'd see walking down the street who'd be singing along to a song, not someone who was a trained singer necessarily. So the record producer's brother or relation or somebody knew a young lady who worked in a shoe shop. And she had done a little bit of singing at school. So they contacted her and said, "Hey, do you want to come and sing on a David Bowie track?" And she's like, "Yes."
I mean, would you say that, how could you say no?
Yeah, exactly. So what you hear is this person who just done a bit of singing at school, wasn't a trained singer, singing along with David Bowie, because he had a very clear vision of how he wanted the second vocal on that track to be. So having sort of someone who's not necessarily in the cream of the musician crop is not unprecedented in those sort of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wasn't there something going on at a local high school here where they choirs auditioned to be a part of a musician's music video or something not too long ago?
Well, there was that thing with Foreigner when they did
that's what it was.
Yeah, when they played at Elmwood Park and they wanted a backing choir for "I Want to Know What Love Is." And I think Foreigner had it set up that each town that they went into, they had a similar thing running. So these choirs were backing them.
Makes sense. All right. Well, we're going to go a different route and talk about the Beatles smoked. I'm going to say MJ for being timid. That way we don't get in trouble with this podcast. But there is a theory that the Beatles smoked MJ in Buckingham Palace. Have you ever heard this, Tim?
I think I have, yes. If it wasn't them who did it, there was someone else that did that.
In the article, he goes, this just made me laugh. He said, I just imagine the royal family describing it as like a jazz cigarette. So basically, the rumor was started by John Lennon himself. He once claimed it happened who once happened to claim that he also wrote Eleanor Rigby, which was a lie. Lennon was later forced to come clean, revealing that he and his fellow Beatles had been too scared to get high, although they had discussed the idea before their arrival. And then Paul McCartney says he basically played the fifth on any of this, and George Harrison says it was just a regular cigarette.
Well, there we are. And certainly back in the 60s, everyone was smoking everywhere. So smoking in Buckingham Palace wouldn't have been frowned upon. It would have just been standard procedure.
I find it very interesting. So I kind of fell down this rabbit hole, Tim, of trying to figure out why smoking just seems more universally accepted in the UK over America. I feel like passing people smoking is like you do it a lot more frequently in the UK than America. And so I was reading it. It's literally because of the anti-smoking campaigns that came out in the United States that didn't come out in the UK. That was all it was.
Yeah, I mean, I know a number of smokers here, but you're right. Certainly in England, being around bands, being in pubs, everybody is smoking. And I remember when they brought it in that you couldn't smoke in pubs anymore and you had to go outside. And like 70% of your audience would disappear outside in like big swaths of people. Yeah, I think it's more of a thing, I think. And it's funny because cigarettes in the UK are so stupid expensive. I mean, here it depends state to state. Like New York State, the taxes are a lot more than they are here in Virginia. But in the UK, the price of cigarettes is absolutely absurd.
And they said that was in an effort to try to stop people from smoking. But in the United States, there was a very huge anti-tobacco campaign. And I'm sure Tim can tell you from experience that there's a lot of commercials. I don't know do you feel like you see that more in America than you did in the UK?
No, I would say if anything, I'd see more of that in the UK. And certainly even in the UK, the boxes of cigarettes, it may have changed. But like here, you buy a packet of cigarettes and it has the branding of whoever make it. And then on the side, it might say Surgeon General's warning, something like that on the side. In the UK, they're not even allowed to carry branding on the packs anymore. All of them, the branding is all in the same font. And I think it may have changed, but all the boxes were like an olive green color. And then on the front of the box is like diseased organs. Like these are tar-laden lungs, and this is someone's heart, and this is someone on their deathbed. And that's the pictures they print on the front of the box.
I don't know. They just said that there was a huge campaign in the early 90s that is why that they're not as popular in America, but maybe it's just a cultural thing, too. Maybe they just don't care in the UK.
Maybe. I don't know. The other thing you had, especially if you lived in the south of England, certainly when England was part of the EU, it was very simple to go over to France, buy lots of cigarettes for cheap and bring them back.
Now, I always find that funny because that's what in America I noticed, when you put in laws in certain areas. So like when I lived in Utah, that beer could only be up to a certain percentage of alcohol, which was significantly lower than any other state. And I find it very funny because that's why I always kind of view like the European countries as the states, because what would people in Utah do, Tim? They just drive over the border, pick up the beer they wanted at the higher alcohol percentage and bring it back.
Yeah, that's exactly what you do. And as I said, certainly when England was part of the EU, you could get on the Channel Tunnel, you could spin over to France for the day, fill up your car full of cheap beer, cheap cigarettes, bring it back completely legally. You didn't have to pay any taxes or duty on it because everything was part of the EU. And there you go. You got your cheap booze and what have you.
But now, unfortunately, that's not a thing.
It is not a thing, but that is a discussion for another time, Joy. That's not something that we can discuss in the 5 minutes left we have of this episode.
Plus, we probably wouldn't want to. All right. So I'm going to leave it with one that I found very interesting. And this will be our final little urban legends is what I'm calling this. But whatever you call these, Tim, things I'm talking about. So this one is about Roy Orbison. And I will say, I thought this to be true, that he was blind. He wasn't blind. I thought he was blind. Did you think he was blind?
No, because I know where you're going with this, but I'll let you read it out.
So basically, the crying singer's normal attire of black clothes, stationary. He was very stationary at concerts, gave an aura of a sad, dark man. And the huge dark glasses he wore both on and off stage led to something else. A persistent rumor that the singer was either born blind or blinded from an accident in some point in his life. The truth is that Orbison was never blind, though he did wear thick glasses to correct his vision. As the story goes, he once accidentally left them on a plane, and the only pair he had to wear were prescription sunglasses, so he wore those on stage. The next day, he left for Europe to open for the Beatles and didn't have much time to find his old glasses or get new ones, so he just kept the sunglasses on. The tour received massive press coverage, and by the time he returned home, he was the singer in the dark glasses. And that made his persona.
Yep, I knew that exactly. I'd heard that before.
I'm going to say it. I kind of fell in the key of I thought he might have been blind.
No, it was all to do with prescription sunglasses.
Poor guy. I mean, maybe I gave him more talent because he plays really well. So if you were blind, that's an extra skill.
There we are.
So for those of you who were like me and thought Roy Orbison was blind, he wasn't. And I'll leave it at that. Do you have anything else for the people, Tim?
Yep, I would say my recommendation for the week is listen to the track Starfleet by Brian May. It was released this week or re-released this week. It features Brian May and Eddie Van Halen and a bunch of other session musicians. It's a very catchy track. I have it on every available possible format because I'm a geek and a massive fan. And I've listened to it 1,000 times and it's stuck in my brain. And I want to share that with all of you. So go on your streamers and listen to Starfleet by Brian May and friends.
Me and Tim live very different life. That's what's in his brain. And my brain can't stop going, where did you come from? Where did you go? Cotton Eye Joe. Anyway. And that's where I'll leave it. Bye.
See you later. Bye-bye.